Good morning or good evening to everyone, depending on who you are. Thank you so much for joining us for today's program. Let me, before I say anything else, wish to all of those who are celebrating Happy Mother's Day. And thank you for joining us on this special day. Um, and hello and welcome to Mishnah Pirkei Avot in the light of Second Temple history with Rabbi Professor Reuven Kimelman, a two-part series. Today's presentation, the first in the series, is titled, Was Shimon HaTsadik or Hillel most responsible for formulating a Torah-centered Judaism? Please join us on June 7th for Was Rabban Gamliel or Rabban Yochanan Hillel's successor? Please also mark your calendar for Sunday, June 14th for our commemoration of the yortzeit of our teacher, Rav David Weiss Halivni. More information on that will follow. Please note this program is being recorded. Also, everyone is muted, but we welcome questions and comments in the chat and possibly people unmuting during that question and comment. And we'll do our best to address those questions and comments toward the end of the presentation. My name is Noah Gradowski. I'm the secretary of UTJ. Thank you to our sponsors for this webinar, whose names I am putting into the chat and will mention briefly here. Juan Yosef Mesta Freidel, in honor of Rabbi Professor Reuven Kimelman, one of the most outstanding teachers I have ever had. Noah Gradowski, that's me, in honor of the many rabbis, scholars, and lay people who make UTJ what it is. Those are our seasoned sponsors, our sustainer, Dr. Yehudi Feldman, in memory of his sister, Naomi Devora Bat Harav Meir, and our friends, Rabbi Azriel Fellner, Dr. Monique Katz in honor of Rabbi Kimelman, Leslie Monchar in honor of Dr. Yehudi and Brenda Feldman, Dr. Gersten and Sternstein, and Rabbi Daniel M. Zucker in memory of Rabbi and Mrs. John J. Zucker. I'd also like to thank everyone who made a donation along with registering for the program. For those of you who are new to UTJ, we include a brief introduction. The Union for Traditional Judaism, UTJ, is a group of rabbis, scholars, and lay people who advocate for a passionate, open-minded approach to Torah study and observance of Jewish law, halacha, rooted in classical religious sources and informed by modern scholarship. Our philosophy is distinguished by the symbiotic relationship between faith in the God-given Torah and an intellectual integrity, and our emphasis on the sacred framework of halacha as our unifying guide. With that, let me introduce our speaker. Rabbi Professor Reuven Kimelman is professor of classical Judaica at Brandeis University and also former rabbi of Beth Abraham Sephardic Congregation of New England. He is also scholar in residence at the Kaplan JCC on the Palisades. He specializes in the history of classical Judaism with a focus on the history of poetics and of the Jewish liturgy. His latest study is titled The Rhetoric of Jewish Prayer, a historical and literary commentary on the daily prayer book. His other book is The Mystical Meaning of Lecha Dodi and Kabbalat Shabbat. Professor Kimelman's other writings focus on the interaction between Judaism and Christianity, on the ethics of war, and on his mentor, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Please note that today's source sheets will be displayed on screen, and there is a link in the chat to that source sheet. For those watching a video of this program, please look to the video description for a link to those sources. And now, with thanks to Rabbi Professor Kimelman for joining us today, I'll turn it over to Professor Kimelman.
Okay, Noah, thank you very much. I want to wish everybody a happy Mother's Day. I assume that everybody is derived from one. The question was one time asked to Professor Lieberman when a group was creating a Jewish calendar for the year, should they include Father's Day and Mother's Day? And he quipped that Kibbut Av V'Em is not a mitzvah shazman grama. and therefore should not be relegated to a single day of the year. I didn't know the way he quipped that humorously or seriously. In any case, we have a combination of Mother's Day and the study of Pirkei Avot. Now, it's actually the study of Mishnah Avot. It didn't acquire the title Pirkei Avot to the Gaonic period, when the minhag arose of reading a chapter by chapter after Pesach up to Shavuot. The trouble is that the Mishnah Avot only has 5 chapters, and we need 6 Shabbatot after Pesach up to Shavuot. So a 6th chapter was added, which is in the style of Avot, but not actually a chapter of Avot. It's written B'Lashon Chachamim. Because this was read or studied chapter by chapter, it became known as Pirkei Avot, although its real title is Mishnah Avot, and some people just call it Perek, because they learn it chapter by chapter. In any case, we're looking at the opening statements of Avot and trying to find out the history of Second Temple Judaism, the period that it reflects, and what can we learn of the historical connection between the two. We begin with the opening comment, which is extraordinarily difficult. Everybody has the text in front of them, and it says there, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received Torah from Sinai, umasara liYeshua, and transmitted it to Joshua. Joshua to the elders, elders to the prophets, and the prophets transmitted it to the men of the great assembly. Now first focus upon the verbs. Moshe kibel, that is the verb used with regard to what Moshe did. But then Moshe transmitted it, masar, misara. And the word we know from there is misoret, tradition. Now where does this list come from? There is absolutely no evidence of such a transmission in Tanakh itself. We don't have anywhere this group. Now we do know that Yeshua succeeded Moshe, and that the Zkenim succeeded Yeshua, but to go from the Zkenim to the Nevi'im is very difficult, even though, according to tradition, some of the last Nevi'im were members of Anshe Knesset Gedolah. But the real problem is, what does the word Torah mean? There is no consensus whatsoever among traditional commentators and modern commentators. What does the word include? So first, let us begin. What does it exclude? It must exclude the word HaTorah. We have in a vote later on that the world stands on 3 things, and one of them is HaTorah. We also have a distinction in its use in Torah itself between the word Torah and HaTorah. So let's look at the phrases as they appear in Tanakh and see what its possible meaning is. So in Deuteronomy 31:19, it says, Vayichtov Moshe et HaTorah azot. Here the word is HaTorah. So clearly it is something which Moshe wrote. And then, Vayitna el Kohanim, B'nai Levi. And it's transmuted to the Kohanim. Who are the Kohanim? Nos'im et Aron Brit Hashem. V'kol Ziknei Yisrael. So here we have an interesting combination of a given to the Kohanim, telling who the Kohanim, because they carry the Aron, and Ziknei Yisrael. So we have the phrase Ziknei Yisrael, but the major recipient is Kohanim. What are they the recipient of? HaTorah. That means the written Torah. Vayichtov Moshe et HaTorah. So it has to be Torah shebichtav. This understanding is confirmed several verses later, Deuteronomy 31, 25 to 26. There it says, Vayitzav Moshe et HaLeviim, who again, Nosei Aron, Brit Hashem Lemor, Lakoach et Sefer HaTorah Hazeh. He told them, commanded them, ordered them to take Sefer Torah Hazeh. Now the word Sefer, we now translate it as book. But Sefer in biblical Hebrew, especially in Sefer Devarim, normally means a document, like a get, a document, right? Not a book. It's a scroll. And where did he put it? He put it on Mitzad Aron, again, next to the Aron, Brit Hashem. Vayasham b'chal aid. And there's the function as some type of aid. Aid, meaning a testimony or a reminder. What is clear here, that Sefer HaTorah was given to the Kohanim. And therefore, when it says Moshe Kibel Torah, the word Torah cannot mean HaTorah, because the Torah is explicit in saying that HaTorah, the actual book or document or scroll, was in the hands of the Kohanim, B'nai Levi, who carry the Aron. And apparently that is where the Sefer HaTorah was there. So now the question is, what does the word Torah mean? So among traditional commentators, it's generally a maximalist position. So they argue that Torah means Torah shebichtav and Torah she'al peh. Now we're used to saying Torah she'bal peh. But in Hebrew, the word for oral is al peh. The bet probably was assimilated because of the parallel expression Torah shebichtav. So it became Torah she'bal peh, even though it should be Torah she'al peh. Now that's a very difficult interpretation for the simple reason that the expression Torah she'bal or al peh does not appear in Second Temple literature. It doesn't even appear in early Tannaitic literature. So the question is, what does the word Torah mean? So I'm going to make several suggestions based upon its use in the Tanakh itself. So now we look at Deuteronomy 17, 9, 11. What is the function of the Kohanim and the Leviim in biblical literature? There it says, Uvata el ha-Kohanim el-Leviim ve'el ha-Shofet asher yiyeh b'yamim hahem. So you're going to the Kohanim, or the Levitical priests, and to the judge in those days, v'gid lecha et devar ha-mishpat, and they will inform you what the law is, or the decision. You come, they give a decision. Now who does this? The Kohanim. They give devar ha-mishpat. And then the next line says, Vasita pia davar asher yagidu lecha, and you will comply with what they tell you. And it tells you from where? Min hamakom asher yivchar Hashem, from the place that God will choose, which means they don't yet name Yerushalayim. And then you should observe and do, now watch the words, Kachol asher yorucha. You should do everything that they instruct you. Now the word yorucha is clearly connected to the word Torah. Asher yorucha, the result of yorucha is Torah. And the next line combines the two. Al pi ha-Torah asher yorucha. So you could translate this according to the Torah. Or you could say according to the decision, that is their teaching, asher yorucha, that they will instruct you. Vala mishpat asher yamru lecha. So al pi ha-Torah asher yorucha is parallel to v'al ha-mishpat asher yamru lecha. And you should do this and don't deviate it left or right. So now the question is the word Torah connected to the word Yerucha? And therefore, the possibility is Moshe kibel Torah misinai, which means he gave or he received the authority to interpret the Torah. And that authority to interpret the Torah was given to Yeshua, Yeshua to the Zkenim, them to the Nevi'im, and Anshe Knesset Gedolah. So now the question arises, does the Torah refer to a specific book, or is the word Torah the authority to interpret the Torah? And here we find the difference between the Kohen and others. So we look at the very end of Tanakh. We go to Malachi, chapter 2, verse 7. There it says, Ki siftei Kohen yishmuru dat. So the lips of a priest, I translate preserve knowledge. Therefore you go to them. The Torah yivakshu mipiu ki malach Hashem tzavot. And because the priest is comparable to the angel or messenger of God, he gives us what? Torah. So again here, Torah probably means authoritative instruction. And then Malachi 3:22 says, Zichru Torat Moshe Avdi, Asher Tziviti Oto B'chorev. So if we say the word Torat Moshe, we probably mean HaTorah. But if we just say the word Torah, it comes from the word Asher Yorucha. So I am suggesting that the transmission mentioned at the very beginning of Avot is not the transmission of A, B, C, D. Rather, it's the transmission of the authority to give rulings with regard to the Torah. The authority to give rulings with regard to the Torah. Asher Yorucha. Now this makes perfect sense because the transmission goes from Moshe to Yeshua. Not the book, but Yeshua is the successor of Moshe, and therefore Yeshua becomes the authoritative interpreter of the Torah. Now what is remarkable about Avot is that while the Tanakh emphasizes the transmission and the authority to interpret is in the hands of the Kohanim, in Avot, the Kohanim are left out totally. They are not mentioned at all, despite their prevalence in the Tanakh itself. It's because of this that there are many scholars who refer to Mishnah Avot as a Pharisaic manifesto. What is the Pharisaic manifesto? The authority to interpret Torah is not based upon birth, but based upon achievement. In other words, it's in the hands of the Chachamim. Now you could be a Kohen, like Rabbi Tarfon was, but to qualify, you have to have knowledge of the Torah to give authoritative rulings. They were primarily opposed by the Kohanim, who argue that based on the biblical text, the Torah, the physical Torah, is in the hands of the Kohanim, B'nai Levi, and they are the authoritative interpreters of the Torah. These two positions became crystallized into religio-political parties of the Second Temple. The Tzdukim argued for the authority of the Kohanim, established by birth, and the Prushim argued for the authority of the learned, established by knowledge. Now this only begins to change a little bit later. So go down in the text a little bit more, and we come to there. Eli and Shmuel is a major transmission, because it says with regard to Eli, who shafat et Yisrael 40 shana. Who does this? Eli. A similar expression is said with regard to Shmuel. So it could be that in the period of Eli and Shmuel is when the great transition took place in the biblical period, where the authority to a non-Kohen. Now, Shmuel is also somewhat miyuchas, distinguished by his lineage, but he's not a Kohen. So let's look at Jeremiah, where the phrase is used. There we have all three together. Ki lo tovat Torah mikahen. So the Torah belongs to the Kohen. Veitzah michacham. A person who's wise can give eitzah. And davar from Navi. So you have three categories. We have Torah, which I don't think means the written Torah. It means, as Malachi said, the Kohen is authorized in the biblical period to give authoritative interpretation of the Torah. Now, Eitzah, which is the act of wisdom, comes from Chacham. But the word davar means davar Hashem. The word of God comes from the Navi. So let's go down to the next source. We can see this play out. In Haggai, it says, Ko Amar Adonai Tzavot, Sha'al na et HaKohanim Torah limor. So God says, if you have a question, who do you go to? The Kohen. And what do you expect? An authoritative instruction. Sha'al na et HaKohanim Torah. His authoritative instruction is called Torah, based upon the verb Ka'asher Yorucha. Now that is the Kohen. Now comes a great transformation in 1 Samuel 7:15. There, instead of saying Eli Shafat, it says Vayishpot Shmuel et Yisrael Kol Yemei Chayav. Now Shmuel belongs to the Nevi'im. One could also see him maybe as the last of the Zkenim. But this line is extraordinarily significant because it moves the authority partially from the Kohen to the Navi. And Amos kind of characterizes it, almost makes it authoritative. He says in Amos 3:7, Ki lo yaseh Adonai Elohim davar. Davar. Ki im gala sodo el avadav nevi'im. So like the previous comment said, the word davar belongs to the Navi. Here we have Amos defining what is a Navi. A Navi is one of the intimates of God. And being an intimate of God, he is informed of God's plan and program. So here it says, God will not do davar, will not do anything without revealing sodo, which means what he himself only knew, but now he shares with the prophet. And who are the prophet called? Elavadav Nevi'im. So in the biblical period, primarily, shofet, hora'ah, belongs to the Kohen. And the davar, the word of God, belongs to the prophet. Now we come to what it says actually in Avot, and what do they do? So we're arguing here that the word Torah means authoritative interpretation of the Torah. And the question is, who has that authority? The Kohanim claimed it was theirs, and the Prushim claimed it goes to the qualified. And the most remarkable thing is, it goes from Nevi'im, who have the Davar, to Anshe Knesset Hagadolah. That means the Anshe Knesset Hagadolah, which in the transmission, are the successors of Moshe and the successors of the Nevi'im. And this became part of the rabbinic position as articulated in Baba Batra. Hopefully one day we'll go through that in detail. Now, Anshe Knesset Hagadolah said three things. Heim Amru Shosha Davarim. Number one, Havu Matunim Bedin. Number two, Hamidu Talmudim Harbe. Number three, Asu Se'eg Torah. Now, if it says Havu Matunim Bedin, it means their audience are those people who adjudicate. So from here we know that by this time, the Pharisees, or the learned, were not just scholars, but they were active in the courts. Second, Hamidu Talmidim Harbe. The second goal was to raise many disciples. Now the word Harbe is interesting, because we would normally say Hamidu Talmidim Rabim. So Professor Judah Golden, my teacher, says the word harbe is an echo of its use in Kohelet. There it says, Asot Sfarim Harbe Ein Kates. So a great debate arose. What is the primary function of a Chacham? Is it to write books, Asot Sfarim Harbe, or is it to raise many disciples? Now this is extraordinarily significant because a question arises by almost all scholars. Why did the rabbinic interpretation of Torah win out in Judaism? And the other interpretations, which are all throughout Second Temple literature, did not. So one answer is, other people in the Second Temple wrote books. We have the Apocrypha, other people call it pseudepigrapha, and we have Qumran. Everybody was writing books, and many of the books they wrote were rewriting aspects of the Torah. The book of Jubilees almost rewrites the book of Genesis. So people were putting forth their interpretation of the Torah by revising and rewriting it. Chazal did the opposite. We have no book from them, but we have commentary on the Torah from them. Meaning what Chazal did is made themselves subject to the Torah. They did not offer written alternatives to the Torah. They only offered oral interpretation of the Torah. Therefore, they did not compete with the authority of the Torah, but rather derive their authority from Torah. In the end of all the groups, and some people count them up to 24 groups, which tried to get the loyalty of the Jewish people in the Second Temple period, the only group that succeeded was Chazal, and Chazal commented on the Torah, but did not write an alternative book. Therefore, their authority is Torah derivative. In the end, they won over the people. So instead of saying Asot Sfarim Harbe, which people were doing, we have a large, grand literature of the Second Temple period, most of it quite religious, especially that from Qumran. So instead of making many books, they were raising many disciples. And the last phrase is Asu Siyag La Torah. Now this is taken in almost all commentary of the last 1,500 years, that to make a fence around the Torah means to prohibit, extra prohibit, in order you not come to transgress the Torah. But the phrase La Torah probably means the physical book of Torah. Now, according to some, the original Torah had no breaks between words. Much of ancient literature had no space from word to word. You had to figure it out. Therefore, reading the Torah and interpreting the Torah could be subject to many misinterpretations or various interpretations. So one expression, Asu Seyag Torah, actually means make the Torah more clear so that people will not make mistakes. There are three things which did this in the Jewish tradition. Number one was the separation of the letters into words. Number two is the adding of nikudot, even not to the written Torah, but to transmission, which clearly clarifies it. And number three, probably the last in the development, although may not be, is tameh, hanegina, how to sing it. When you chant the Torah, one of the functions of tameh hanegina, the trup, is to put certain words together, and they function much more sophisticated than does our period, or commas, or exclamation marks. In fact, something like the pazer, you have three times. When a person could not make a decision as thinking and thinking and thinking, you actually sing it out. Now, this idea that one of the major functions of the Pharisees was to adjudicate conflict as a function of judges is reflected and two other comments in the first chapter of Avot. In number 8, Yehuda ben Tabai Omer, Al tas atzmacha korchei hadayanim, which means the audience of the comment are judges. And don't make yourself orchei hadayanim. Now the word orchei probably originally was written with an aleph. And it's based upon the Greek word arche. Arche is rosh. So arche hadayanim probably originally meant don't make yourself into the chief judge. Orchei din, in modern Hebrew, became a lawyer. But we don't have lawyers in ancient Jewish law, and therefore it's probably based upon the Greek archei adayanim, and therefore I translated, do not assert yourself as the chief judge, either because you're over asserting your authority, or because of the rabbinic position that courts should have a minimum of 3 judges, and all judges have an equal vote. Therefore, don't make yourself higher than the others, or try to adjudicate a case alone. So then the rest of the comment is telling you how to act as a judge. Kishayu ba'alei dinim omdim lefanecha, yu beinecha kirashaim. When they come to court, you perceive them as guilty, which means you don't take sides and acquit anybody before the evidence. And you make sure what? That you cross-examine them properly. Then it says, Kishiniftarim milfanecha. When the decision is over, you beinecha kizakaim. You are the judge, are to consider themselves innocent. Why? Kishiblu alehem etadin. Once they accepted the judgment is made, and they are no longer innocent or guilty because the decision has been made and they have followed up. Similarly, in 9, which follows Yehuda ben Tabai, Shimon ben Shatach Omer, Hevei marbe lachkor et aidim, which means again, who the Pharisees are functioning as judges. And he's telling them, marbe lachkor, called drisha v'chakira, when you cross-examine the witnesses, do it thoroughly. It's your job to find out the truth. And then he tells you something that only an experienced judge would inform you. He says, when you talk, be very careful in the words you say. Hevei zahir bidvarecha. Because the way you express yourself, they will find a loophole and learn to deceive by virtue of the words you use. So watch it. Hevei zahir bidvarecha. Why? Shema mitocham. That is from them, the words you use, they can do what? Yumadu l'shakir. So it's clear from 8 and 9 that this is experienced wisdom of people who have served as judges, and therefore it's good evidence in the Second Temple period the Pharisees functioned as judges, arbitrating the Torah, and tell you what it means. So we have now almost a total success of the transmission from Kohanic authority to what later on became known as rabbinic authority. I don't want to use the word rabbinic because none of these men are called rabbis. That title, as far as we know, does not come into Jewish existence as an official title till after the destruction of the Second Temple, when we have a Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabban Gamliel. Okay, now what caused the great transmission? So let's look at the next page. This is really remarkable. The main figure of the transmission is Shimon HaTsadik. Now, who is Shimon HaTsadik? So he's popularly identified with the Kohen Gadol about the year 190 BCE. He's described in the book of Ben Sirah when he comes out of the Kodesh Kodashim on Yom Kippurim. Now the question is, why is he called HaTsadik? Who else in the Tanakh is called Tzadik? Only Noah. In rabbinic literature, Yosef is called HaTsadik, but there, the Tzadik means the innocent one. Bat Potifera charged him. He was innocent of the charge, therefore he's Yosef HaTsadik. But that's in rabbinic literature. In biblical literature, it's Noah. Now, Noah is Tzaddik, which means Noah deviated positively from his generation. They were all involved in Hamas, which is the misappropriation of possessions. But Noah, no. So he was different. Now, why was Shimon, if he was a Kohen Gadol, why is he called Tzaddik? Okay? Because Yosef, I said, in rabbinic literature is called Tzaddik, but not in biblical literature. So here it says here, Hu Ayomer, Al Shosha Devarim Ha'olam Omeid. So the world stands on three things. Like tables in those days, if you know the Pirushim on the Haggadah, the small tables had three legs, and that's what stabilized them. Now, what are they, and what's so significant? Number one, Al HaTorah. Not Al Torah, but Al HaTorah. Secondly, the Al HaAvodah. Three, Al Gemir Chasadim. Now, what is so remarkable about this comment? That the author of the comment is called HaTsadik, Shimon HaTsadik. Is it the content or is it the order? So let's see how these words are used in Tanakh itself. So if we go to chapter 2, book 2 of Chronicles, chapter 31, verses 20 to 1. There it talks about the righteous king was Hezekiah and how successful he was. Vayas hatov, vayashar, vayemet. Tov, good, yashar, vayemet. Translated upright and faithful, but before his God. Then it says, now we're talking about the 8th century BCE, more or less. He was involved in three things. Avodat Beit Elohim, Uba Torah, Uba Mitzvah. Avodat Beit Elohim means the temple cult. Torah probably means Torah, either the 5 books of Moses or all the rest of the Tanakh of his day. And what's the third thing? Mitzvah. So we have three things. Avodat Beit Elohim, Torah and Mitzvah. Now let's look down further. It's amazing if we compare that to Avot. So if you look at Avot, Shimon HaTsadik also has three things. They are Al Torah, Al Avodah, Val Gimur Chasadim. If you look at the two, you'll note that the three are almost identical. Avodat Beit Elohim becomes Al Avodah. Torah is Torah. And Mitzvah is Gimur Chasadim. Now, Gimur Chasadim, we normally translate as kindness, but Gimur Chasadim probably means to reciprocate divine kindness. So prayer is included in Gimur Chasadim. And therefore, the equivalent of mitzvah is Gemilut Chasadim. Now, what is remarkable here? What Shimon HaTsadik did. He reversed the order. So in the time of Chizkiah HaMelech, the primary institution in Judaism was Avodat Beit Elohim. The temple outshadowed everything. What was number 2? Torah. And then, of course, we have practice. Comes along Shimon HaTsadik, and if he was the Kohen Gadol, it's quite revolutionary. What does he do? He puts the primacy on the word Torah, Al Torah. So what was second by Chizkiah HaMelech is primary by Shimon HaTsadik. And what now is secondary? The Avodah. So this reflects the debate between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Sadducees arguing for the primacy of the temple, and the Pharisees arguing for the primacy of Torah. So what is remarkable with Shimon HaTsadik, if he was a Kohen Gadol, he deviated from the position of the Kohanim by placing the primacy on Torah, Al HaTorah, Al Avodah, Val Gimur Chasadim. And therefore, to have the authority of the high priest for the primacy of Torah allowed the Pharisaic group to adopt this high priest as one of their primary teachers, because he brought about the revolution of the primacy of Torah over temple. Now, it's remarkable. Had that not happened, and the temple been destroyed, and in the eyes of all, the temple was number one almost exclusively, then we could have been out of business. The Pharisaic revolution, which put the primacy on the Torah as opposed to the temple, meaning when the temple was destroyed, we still had Al Torah. So we lost not what was primary, but was very significant, but secondary. Now, what's amazing is, if you look at Avot Rabbi Natan, chapter 4, in the Schechter edition, page 23, we have the famous story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai coming to the Emperor Vespasian, who was not yet the emperor, announcing he is the emperor. And of course, the give and take there is extraordinarily interesting, but not our topic for today. Vespasian asked Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, you asked for Yavna, what are you going to do in Yavna? So according to Avot Rabbi Natan, this is what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said. He said, Eshna ba l'tamidai, ek ba tefillah, ve'seba kol mitzvot. So I look at the three, and they correspond to Shimon HaTsadik, but they've been updated. So now we are talking about Torah She'al Peh, Mishnaic learning. This is after the destruction. He's going to do this after the destruction of the temple. He already has a program. So what's he going to do? He's going to set up Yavna, set up a Beit Midrash. And what do you do in the Beit Midrash? We're not studying Bible. This is advanced studying. We're studying Mishnaic learning. Not the actual Mishnah as we have it, but the type of learning which became the Mishnah. Veshna ba l'talmidai. I will teach them Mishnah, or the oral teachings, or Pharisaic understanding of Tanakh. Next, v'gba ba tefillah. Instead of using the avodah, which meant the temple, by this time, it's avodah shebalev. But what is he saying? Egba ba tefillah. We have in the Second Temple period a large number of prayers, going all the way back to Daniel, who prayed three times a day, pacing Jerusalem on his knees. But we don't know the prayer that Daniel used. And we have many, many prayers in the Second Temple period. But we have no practice of fixed prayer by laity. There may have been fixed prayer in the Mikdash, or at least fixed recitations of selections of Tanakh, but we don't have Tfilah Kvuah. The Amidah, Rabban Gamaliel, who probably was a disciple or a contemporary of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's the one who said we should say Shmona Esrei Brachot B'chol Yom. In other words, we don't just pray, we have a fixed prayer with a fixed content at a fixed time. And since it's a fixed prayer with a fixed content at a fixed time, said communally, it can function as a replacement of avodah. So avodah is not replaced by prayer, tefillah. Avodah is replaced by tefillah kevuah, ekba bat tefillah. Have a fixed prayer at a fixed time, said by a community. That could be a partial replacement for the cult. And then he says, V'seba kol mitzvot, which goes back to the expression used in Chronicles 2, mitzvah. So we have Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and in Avot Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is placed in Avot Rabbi Natan as a commentary to the phrase of Shimon HaTsadik. So Avot Rabbi Natan sees Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as the successor of Shimon HaTsadik, who was already plotting, as it were, the reconstruction of Judaism, despite the absence of the temple, which is based upon the teaching of Mishnah, fixed times for prayer, and the doing of all the mitzvot which can be done. Now, remarkable, it shows you that according to Avot Rabbi Natan, the revolution initiated by Shimon HaTsadik of the primacy of Torah and Avodah becomes the program of Yochanan ben Zakkai. Much of the insight here is based upon an article by my teacher Judah Golden, found in his book Studies in Midrash and Related Literature. Now I'm going to go one step further before we open for questions, and that is the end of the text. Look at the very bottom here. It's remarkable that a prayer which appears in the Amidah, which is Tfilah Kivu'ah, there we have the expression, everybody knows it by heart, but probably did not relate it to the program of Shimon HaTsadik and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Look at the order here. In the Tfilah of Avodah Tshuva, it says, Hashivenu Avinu L'Toratecha. Now, we have the word Hashivenu, which means, our Father, return us to your Torah. It doesn't say teach us, it's remarkable. It's Hashivenu. Now, what is Hashivenu? It's like if you lost something, you spend a lot of time trying to find it. So God does not teach us Torah, He restores us. We were there, we deviated and left. So, and according to the Shema, the teacher of Torah is father to son. V'shinantam levanecha, v'limartam et b'nechem. So therefore, when he calls the Torah, we refer to God as Avinu. Hashivenu Avinu. What's number one? L'Toratecha. Interesting. What's number two? Karvenu Malkeinu Lavoratecha. So number two is Avodah. Now, we're not quite sure what the word Avodah means here. Is Avodah Beit HaMikdash? Avodah? Or is it like it's used in the Haggadah? V'kervanu hamakom lavorato, and there it's referring to Har Sinai. So avodah could mean worship, but it could mean avodah shebelev, tefillah. So we have two parallel expressions: Hashivenu Avinu L'Toratecha, then Karvenu Malkeinu Lavoratecha. God is called Avinu Malkeinu. Give us access to your avodah. And then the third is Achzirenu, and you can't say bit tshuva because tshuva is already in the first line, Hashivenu. You have to go one step further. So Achzirenu bit tshuva shlema. Now, what is tshuva shlema? When one feels that one is lifanecha. So we have the means, Torah, avodah, but the result is tshuva shlema, where you feel yourself lefanecha, and the order of number line 3 is reversed to reach the conclusion that you end with the word lefanecha. So it defines tshuva as a sense of being right before God, and the means to this are Torah and avodah. So even in the Amidah, we have a take on the revolution instituted by Shimon HaTsadik, that the world stands on 3 things: Torah, number 1, 2, avodah, and the result is lefanecha. So now we have this revolution of the Pharisees, and we can see it begins already in Tanakh when Shmuel is the shofet as opposed to Eli. So the judicial functions are now going to the non-Kohanim. Shimon HaTsadik instigates, as it were, officially that revolution. This became the Pharisaic position, emphasizing the asot sfarim harbe. We do not make many books, but rather we are amidu talmidim harbe. We raise many disciples of the book. And the argument is that one of the reasons the Pharisaic position won out is that they always perceived their authority as derivative of the Torah and did not try to rewrite the Torah as did in Qumran, as did the Book of Jubilees, and several other books of the Second Temple period. and therefore their teaching remained oral. Torah she'al peh. As long as it was oral, it never theoretically displaced Torah shebichtav. And since the sages, the successors of the Pharisees, always saw their authority as derivative, but not competitive with the Bible, they became the successors of the Torah to this day. And because of that, and because of them, we read between Pesach and Shavuot, Pirkei Avot, or Mishnah Avot. And thus we have the evidence from the Second Temple period of the Pharisaic revolution, and why the first chapter of Avot is rightfully called a Pharisaic manifesto. Okay, I didn't get to Hillel, which we'll get to the next session. It's another part of the revolution, but our time is up, and I want to allow for times for questions.
With apologies for some technical difficulties we had, the first question and the question and answers didn't record, but it was my question, and I was asking that Rabbi Kimelman mentioned that the Al Gemilut Chasadim includes prayer, and I found it interesting that then we have in Avot Rabbi Natan, the second thing is establishing prayer, albeit kind of standard prayer. And so I thought it was interesting that perhaps Tefillah went from part of this section into part number 2, and whether that was at all related to in part 3 in Avot Rabbi Natan, that it goes back to the mitzvah that was mentioned in Chronicles versus the Gemilut Chasadim, the general acts of kindness in Avot. And here is how Rabbi Kimelman responded.
It's not tefillah. Prayer is common in the Tanakh. Moshe prays. The Levim pray. But the key element was Daniel. Daniel is not in Israel. He's in Babylonia. And it says he specifically prays thrice daily in the direction of Yerushalayim through an open window. And he's Modeh Umatzle, which may mean something like what we do in Amidah. But the text is not there. So the key word here is ekba, not praying, but having a fixed prayer. That is what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai does with Rabban Gamliel by having 18 blessings. So it is not that prayer replaces avodah, it's that fixed prayer at a fixed time with a fixed order of prayers, that is somewhat tantamount to the avodah. Now, why ARNA, the Avot Rabbi Natan, uses kol mitzvot, could be specifically to reappropriate biblical terminology. But my point is that mitzvah and Gemilut Chasadim are used almost as parallel terms. So when we perform mitzvot, we are in a sense reciprocating divine kindness. And therefore Gemilut Chasadim is not just kindness between God and between man and man. In fact, in the Avot, the first bracha, God is Gomer Chasadim Tovim. That is, God is Gomer Chasadim Tovim, which probably there means to reciprocate the good things that the Avot did, and God reciprocates by redeeming their children. So my point is, the key phrase is Ekba Tfilah, and Tfilah Kvuah is that replaces Avodah.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Marina. After Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the temple lost its primacy? Was Rabbi Yochanan meaning temporarily or permanently?
That takes wisdom way beyond human wisdom at the moment. Some people know it is a current debate in Yerushalayim, right? It is fascinating what's going to take place. If you asked this question 50 years ago, I would think it was an offhanded comment. Now it's become almost a front page issue. We don't know which way it's going to go, but we haven't been very good in predicting what Israel is going to do in the last 50 years. So I have no idea what they're going to do in the next 50 years. But I'd be surprised if the Temple Mount becomes more and more central in Judaism. In any case, in any case, even if you were to reconstruct the temple, the primacy of Torah would remain, except that number two, the avodah would be reinstated. Okay, now the question would arise, who would be the chief rabbi or the chief Kohen Gadol? I would say these problems are beyond my mind at the moment to solve, but probably will be solved through the Israeli political process, and who knows what they're going to do. I'm not going to predict the matter. I've been very bad at predicting the last 50 years. I assume I'll be just as bad in predicting the next 50 years.
So, Rabbi,
Yeah.
when we say next year in Jerusalem, it's nostalgic.
Well, people say Yerushalayim HaBenuya. Now, Yerushalayim does that include the rebuilding of the Mikdash? Okay, it will be a hot political topic, and it's going to come to the fore. I don't know which way it's going to go. I'm not expressing an opinion. I'm not a contemporary commentator. But I want to say one more thing at the place we left out. The comment of Hillel, which says, Hevei mi talmidav shel Aaron, fits into this radical innovation. Because until Hillel's time, people related to Aaron as banim. A Kohen is a descendant of a Kohen. If your father was a Kohen, you are a Kohen. Comes along Hillel and says you can be a disciple of Aaron without being a son of Aaron. And what do you have to do? You have to imitate his behavior. Now, you would have expected the phrase to say we would imitate his behavior functioning in the Beit HaMikdash. But if you're a Talmid of Aaron and not a son of Aaron, you can't function. So what the Pharisees did was not only appropriate Mosaic authority, they appropriated Aaronic authority, leaving the Sadducees with nothing.
Shachar writes, is there a definitive or golden source book for the historical development of Pirkei Avot, similar to the brief introduction we heard beginning this talk? Even better if there are sources for the history of Aramat Bea Tefillah.
It was so insulting. He walked
On
away.
the topic of Avot, I want to show you two books. Can you see this? These are two books here, written by Professor
Maybe hold a
Shimon
little bit
HaTsadik
higher.
of Bar Ilan University. One is called Masechet Avot L'Doroteha. Can you see the picture?
Yeah.
And the other one is called Lishona V'Signo Shel Masechet Avot. This is the most authoritative text we have, all the manuscripts, and all of the early commentators on Avot. Okay, now, there is no authoritative text on Avot, a history of it, meaning what it means in the Second Temple period, the number of historians of the last 100 years who've tried to locate different comments of Avot in the history of the period. One of the primary among them was Professor Levi Ginsburg, one of the great geniuses of the 20th century, has extensive commentary on placing texts in Avot in the context of the Second Temple period. I did not repeat the things he used. I did focus on what my own teacher did, who was a student of Levi Ginsburg, is Judah Golden, because Judah Golden had an extraordinary sensitivity to language, and he followed specifically the words that Chazal used and tried to extrapolate from them. So he is the one who put Torah, Avodah, Gemur Chasadim in comparison with Chizkiah. My addition was to add Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to it and make it a 3-stage chart, which I think is the evidence of my position is that Avot Rabbi Natan itself places Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's comment as a commentary to Shimon HaTsadik's comment, which means they saw it as a continuation of that program of the primacy of Torah and therefore the secondary status of Mikdash. And of course, the third, Gimul Chasadim, or the mitzvah, remains exactly in place.
Kimelman, if you could please email me the title of those books and any other recommendations, I can include it in some program notes with the video. I'll remind you of that. And I'll ask a final question and then make some final comments, most of which I've already put into the chat. Gersten asks, complete non sequitur, but how do we know when avadim means servants and when it means slaves, as in avadim hayinu leFaro, that we were slaves to Pharaoh?
Well, there, avadim hayinu leFaro can only mean what? Slaves. But since you're asking Pirkei Avot, the best thing to do that is look at Pirkei Avot, the statement by Tignosh Ish Socho, who was successor of Shimon HaTsadik. Hu hayomer al tiyuk avadim hameshamshim et harav amanat lekabel pras. Now there, in the Second Temple period, in the Roman world, avadim were slaves. And amanat lekabel pras, the word pras is probably a Greek word, and there it means your evening allowance. So people worked all day, and their master gave them dinner. And there the question is, not servants, actually slaves. And the slavery was very common in the Roman period. In fact, at one time, a slave was freed so they could count him as a 10th member of a minyan. The trouble with freeing a slave is once you free him, he remains free. So it's quite remarkable, if you know the story of the Talmud, how a person was willing to give up a slave, which means he had invested a lot of money in it, to fulfill what? Have a 10th man for a minyan. It's a remarkable story. But it does mean that have slaves. Now, if you look at rabbinic literature, it's amazing the restrictions put on what you could do to a slave. So just give me two examples. A slave is a slave because you own his body and his time. But in biblical law, you can't make a slave work on Shabbat, which means you don't own his time. Secondly, if you hit him and knock out a tooth or an eye, he goes free. So you don't really own his body. Now, if you don't own his time and you don't own his body, he's more like a servant than a slave. So Chazal actually says, Koa koneh, anybody who acquires an Evan, koneh lo adon. In other words, the restrictions on slavery were so strict, it almost didn't pay to have them. So while we have them, they seem to be quite rare. And as time went on, they got eliminated totally. But anyhow, the phrase of Antignos Isoko, it says, Al tiyuk avadim. Now he's using this as an analogy of the worship of God. In other words, the worship of God should not be reward-based. And therefore, don't be like a slave who works to get his compensation at the end of the day, which means his evening meal. Remarkable. So even though we are called avadim, right, the slaves of God, we have to be careful in overstretching the metaphor.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Rabbi Kimelman, for that, and to a very interesting question that spurred those comments. Just to close up, thank you again to all our sponsors. We mentioned the names at the beginning of the chat and have at the beginning of the program, and I've put them into the chat as well. Thank you as well to everyone who made a donation along with registering for this program. Please join us on June 7th for part 2 of this series, which will be titled, Was Rabban Gamliel or Rabban Yochanan Hillel's Successor? And that will be at 10 a.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Israel. Please also mark your calendars for Sunday, June 14th for our commemoration of the yahrzeit of our teacher, Rabbi David Weiss Halivni. More information will follow, but it will probably be around that 10, 11 a.m. time frame Eastern time. We welcome your feedback on the webinar. The feedback link has been put into the chat and will be included in an email that will come with a link to the video of today's program. We look forward to seeing everyone for our next session. And again, wish everyone a happy Mother's Day. Thank you again, Professor Kimelman.